So, how many people in this room have known someone or have been touched by someone who has tried to commit suicide or succeeded in taking their lives? So have a look around, not many people with their hands down. How many people in this room have been or have, at the moment, children? Everybody has been a child, right? But some people also have young children. The work that we're doing in our Australian Research Council grant brings together some of the work that I've done in the past as a researcher. So yes, I've done a lot of work in young offenders institutes where we've spent a lot of time looking at that intersection of mental health and the criminal justice system and how people find themselves stuck in the revolving doors there. But also looking at the efficacy studies of psychological interventions, many and multiple across different contexts. When I was asked to be part of the Australian Research Council grant, I was really intrigued because it's taking a novel approach to understanding how we look at self-harm and suicide. The Right Time to Talk Australian Research Linkage Grant really addresses a problem across Australia and New Zealand. So if you're not aware of the most recent statistics, I'll just let you know one or two of those because they're quite startling. We all know that suicide rates and self-harming continues to rise, particularly is rapidly rising in adolescents. But in the last 12 months, 1 in 12 adolescents have either self-harmed and 1 in 20 have attempted suicide across Australia and New Zealand. It's numbering in the thousands, and 2/3 of those adolescents who self-harm have suicidal ideation. The impact on the specialist mental health services that are in place is quite considerable, and they are overwhelmed. So the capacity is overwhelmed by the need, and that's continuing to be the case. And many parents of adolescents who self-harm struggle to get their child into a service. It takes a long time, and that time can be quite critical. So we wanted to tackle a problem that overwhelms mental health services, and it required a multifaceted systems approach. And what I should say to you, this isn't a criticism of my colleagues in health, but it needed to be novel because medical-oriented interventions haven't been working, and they continue to fail. To date, those medical interventions have not been effective in reducing self-harm, and they certainly have not been effective in preventing or predicting suicidal ideation in children from 8 years old, which is what our study is looking at. So the study is focusing specifically on self-harming and suicidal ideation, but it's taking a novel approach. We're actually not looking at a medical or a health intervention. We're working in schools. And we've taken a school's perspective across a whole range of disciplines. The disciplines that we're working with include mathematicians, and I'll talk a bit about the machine learning approach that we're taking, which is what makes this particular study so novel. We are working with educationists in the Department of Education. We're working with the Department of Health, public policy, sociologists, Indigenous cultural experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, and all of this to tackle an issue that is actually too large and too impactful on schools to seek to leave solely to medical approaches. We're working with teachers. We're working across 30 schools, across 4 universities, including my role here at the University of Auckland. We have a large charitable foundation that's also funded and match-funded the linkage grant, and we continue to engage with wider groups in terms of urban design, thinking about schools and how they relate to architecture and design and other environments externally, including some of our Indigenous colleagues in Australia. I just wanted to highlight here, right at the centre of this work is a school action framework. And one of the things that we know is that schools and school teachers and teacher training at the moment means that our teachers are feeling unprepared to deal with some of the challenges that they're facing in regards to mental health, anxiety, the anxiety pandemic that our children are facing, and also addressing suicidal ideation and self-harm, which actually is often perpetuated through the engagements at school. And we're seeing that through social media as part of the study. So having the ability to support our educators, the schools and the teachers within those schools to be able to respond rapidly and to put something through the Department of Education and Health jointly to assist with this was an outcome of what we're looking at. So rather than just focus on the reducing incidence of self-harming and suicidal behaviours in young children, there are multiple studies that have attempted to do this using a medical orientation. We wanted to do something different. We wanted to generate new substantive methodological knowledge in the prediction of risk and vulnerability, and we wanted to use advances in machine learning and regular measurement of appropriate time-varying characteristics, because what we know about young people who have suicidal ideation is that their emotions are quite erratic and also time-limited. And so while at one point in time we might find that one of the students at the school is indicating that they feel that they're about to self-harm or they have suicidal ideation, 2 minutes later often, that's changed. And what we're looking for is that enduring underlying pattern through machine learning that indicates that this is a time to intervene and this person is more at risk than those people who we're seeing on the pattern of behaviour that we're monitoring through the machine learning and the regular measurement that tells us that some of these people are in a slightly less precarious position. That means that we have the ability to target resources rapidly. The other thing that we're doing is we're developing and implementing the monitoring of student wellbeing validation tools. This is the phase of the study that we're in now. And we're looking at combining the data that we collect from that to data from the Department of Health. They have their own incident notification system. It's quite poor, and we're wanting to help with that. So we're using what we're calling a TVI. It's a Temporal Vulnerability Index, supplementing the Department of Education incident notification system with our own app, which is using machine learning to get real-time data, that temporally arrived at data about the vulnerability index for each student. And what we're doing now is applying that to cohorts across different schools to test out that temporal vulnerability index. We have many students who are working with us across these 30 schools who are really engaged in not only supporting the study, but really already benefiting from the study. And we're developing a series of case studies through the qualitative arm of the study right now. But I want to actually share a story about one of the researchers, because when we started this study and we were working with a psychology team, the psychologist who's working on this in Australia in one of the universities suggested that we take on board this fantastic advanced mathematician who is the king of algorithms. And what's been really phenomenal about this particular study for me, apart from the work that we're engaged in, is having a mathematician sit in the emergency department of a hospital, waiting for 8, 10, 12-year-olds to come through the emergency department with self-harm, suicidal ideation, or at worst, unconscious, and for him to be sitting with health-related colleagues and peers and psychiatrists and in that system working and understanding as a mathematician what that environment is like and sitting and being with the parents. And really what I wanted to say about this is I can't tell you the influence that this work has had on the multidisciplinary team that we're working with. and what I've learned about being able to use machine learning to address this particular issue, and what he and others have learned about what it means to be on the edge and to be watching and working with people on the edge all the time. What we're seeing as we're coming to the third phase of the study now, through our work in machine learning in the emergency departments, is we're really starting to generate data that's helping us to grab surveys that we can now put into the school and work with those students on understanding better how we can tailor-make the app and the work that we're doing to support them and the immediate responses that we're providing to the teachers and to the schools, how we can tailor-make them to make them more culturally appropriate and to make them actually even more diverse in the way in which they're able to respond. We are really fortunate that we have a charitable foundation that's supporting us and it's matched the funding, which means that we're going global. And we've now been able to get Yale on board. And their particular study in the past that was really phenomenal about mental mapping is now part of the work that we're doing. So that's an exciting new opening for us. For the schools, this is just to give you an idea. It's actually really pragmatic. It's so important. It's not just about machine learning and methodological assessments of risk. It's really pragmatic. We are working with schools at the moment to look at those trajectories of student well-being and risk over time and help teachers to really understand how they can identify and prioritise resources. And I think we all understand that at the moment that's got to be key because everybody is exhibiting symptoms of some sort in the schools at the moment. And I want to say that it's not always the people that you expect that have self-harming and suicidal ideation. And one of the people that really prompted this study was a man who set up a foundation in Australia who thought that his daughter was going well through university and found her at home and she had taken her own life. And he wrote a book about this, and that stimulated us to think further and more deeply about the work that we needed to do. And so we've been very fortunate to have many people involved in driving this. But just because this is what we see in our children and on campus and across the nation doesn't mean that one of those people isn't really struggling. And so I dedicate this to my niece who took her own life last year at the age of 16.